Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive. This week, I finished my series on Warhammer 40,000 by discussing the 8th edition. This edition incorporated some elements from older editions, made some tweaks, and did some really significant overhauls to other series of the mechanics. So, while we are fairly late in the edition, this is the current edition. We probably have a good year to 2 years before another edition. So, right now, let's just sit back, relax, and enjoy as I talk about Warhammer 40k 8th edition. Hey, before we get started, just a quick reminder, if you like this video, please click like and subscribe down below. Please leave comments, tell me what you like, what you didn't like, what you want me to cover more of in the future. And with that out of the way, let's just get right on into this. Warhammer 40,000 8th edition is the edition where they've taken everything that they have learned over the previous 7 editions, every issue that they had run into, and have tried to fix it. Now, one of the first things is 8th edition completely invalidated all previous codexes. Because of that, they had to do something so people could still play their armies before the codexes came out. Now, 3rd edition, when it did this, it just shoved the stats into the back of the core book. 2nd edition had a pamphlet in the box set that had the stats for the different units. Well, 8th edition had so much developed since 3rd edition that they couldn't really just shove everything into the core book. Instead, what they did is they released 5 books called the indexes. Each index dealt with a group of units. You had Imperium 1, Imperium 2, Chaos, Xenos 1, Xenos 2. And these gave you your rules until such time as the codexes came out. These also include options that would not go into the codexes, but would stay in the indexes. These options would still be usable. It's just the purpose of codexes now was to print stuff that was being manufactured right now, while the indexes were, here's everything. So, the indexes, even after the codexes came out, are still valuable books. Still usable. Which was a big deal. Because, certain units are only in the indexes. Like the Astra Militarum, formerly the Imperial Guard. Their cavalry units, the Rough Riders, are only in the index. They have not been published in the codex because Games Workshop is no longer making Rough Rider miniatures. Now, going into the actual changes in the game itself, first off, they've kept the sequence from the previous edition. The movement phase, psychic phase, shooting phase, assault phase, and then they put morale into its own phase. they didn't have so much an end of phase and beginning of turn added in, like we're in 7th edition, because stuff doesn't trigger at the start of a turn anymore, or go to the end of a turn anymore. It now goes until a set phase. But they put something in that was a significant change. And these are called command points. Command points are what you use to fuel stratagems. Now, stratagems include things like a reroll of a die. You could reroll an armor save, reroll a failed hit roll, things like that. You can also use it to auto pass a morale test. That is important in some instances. And then, depending on your army, there's various stratagems that you can do. They are all kind of different, all tailored to represent the flavor and theme of that particular faction's army. But that was one element. Now, they also came up with what they called detachments. When you build your army, you can build it in what's called Battle Forged, which means you use a series of detachments. And these detachments give various benefits to them. For the most part, though, those benefits are a number of them give a certain number of bonus command points. Every army has 3 command points, and then depending on your detachments, you get 1 if they're things like Vanguard, Spearhead, things that are basically putting a focus on one type of unit. Whether it's a battalion or a brigade detachment, those also give rather significant bonuses of command points. These detachments also say how many of what type of unit you must field and up to how much of each you can field. And a number of armies now will be built around a 3 detachment model, because you can also pull in allies as a separate detachment. So, for example, say you want to build a mostly Imperial Guard army, Astra Militarum, but you want to have Space Marines as a backup element to it. Well, you might take a battalion Astra Militarum detachment, and then maybe a Vanguard Space Marine detachment. And that would give you an extra command point with some fast attacking Space Marines. And then you'd have your Astra Militarum making up the bulk of your army. From there, though, we come into the actual turn sequence. So, movement phase. Big changes happened here. Instead of units just having these vague, you're a foot infantry, you move 6 inches, you are this, you move this many inches, yada yada. It's each unit has its own movement code. This means, looking at the Space Marines. A standard Space Marine has a movement of 6, which means they move 6 inches. A standard Terminator armor has a movement of 5, meaning they move 5 inches. While a Cataphractii Terminator has a movement of 4. Now, at this point, you can also, during movement, decide if you want to advance your unit. Advancing your unit means you roll 1d6 and add that to how far the unit moves during its movement phase. Okay, now this is basically what we called running in previous editions, except it now occurs during the movement phase, not during the shooting phase. And there are implications for advancing when you get to the shooting phase, and I'll address that then. Now, psychic phase. Psychic phase had a bit of an overhaul as well. So first off, every Psyker knows Smite. Outright. Every single one can just psychically smack someone upside the head. And then there's rules depending on which Psykers you take on what powers that they have in addition to that, how many they can have. And there's no, or in most cases, there's not a large list that they can pull from. Each faction has, for the most part, one set of psychic powers that they get to pick from. And when you go to use a psychic power, you roll 2d6. And you try to equal or exceed the charge value on that power. Your Psyker's leadership no longer comes into play. Mastery is no longer a thing, or is no longer a separate thing. You're just trying to beat, if you have a power that has a warp charge of 7, you need to roll a 7 or higher on that 2d6. That's it. Made the psychic phase a little bit faster paced, a little bit more intuitive as well. Now then we come into shooting phase. And shooting phase had some significant changes to it. First, if a unit moves, it can still fire heavy weapons, but with a penalty. This mattered. Previous editions were, if you had a heavy weapon and moved, you couldn't fire. Period. Now, rapid fire weapons, you can move and there's not a penalty to fire them. And then assault weapons, you can advance and fire an assault weapon with a penalty. Now, rapid fire weapons were codified into, they get their benefit at half range. There were some loopholes in previous editions where some rapid fire weapons got their double shots at 12 inches instead of at half range. Heavy weapons still do, you can't fire them if you move. Well, you can fire them if you moved, but you have a +1 penalty to the target number. Because now it's been changed that there's no more weapon skill, ballistic skill in the way it previously was. Now it's, you have a weapon skill that is your target number. Your ballistic skill is your target number. And any penalties affect that target number. But there's also an option that now exists. Pistols. Now, a unit cannot fire a pistol weapon if it fired any other weapon. And it cannot fire any other weapon if it fired a pistol weapon. But a unit can fire all of its pistol weapons. So, if you could field a unit that had 2 pistols, it can fire both of them. From there, you get into the fact that pistol weapons can be fired at a unit within 1 inch. In other words, if you have pistol weapons and your unit is locked in close combat, they can fire them during the fire phase, during the shooting phase, before you come into the assault phase. Of course, saving throws have been altered as well. They're still the same, 4 up, 3 up, but armor penetration is gone in the way it previously was. There's no, well, my armor penetration is this, so things with this armor value don't get a save. No, everything gets a save. And what happens is when you shoot something, the weapon you use has an armor penetration value, but this is a penalty to what you roll to save. So, if you have an AP of -3, and someone has a 3 up save, they have to roll a 6. Of course, there are still invulnerable saves, which armor penetration doesn't apply to. And those have become considerably more valuable just because of how much armor penetration is on everything. Most weapons have some degree of armor penetration, even if it's only a -1. This means Space Marines now die a little bit easier. But cover saves is no longer a separate save. If you're in cover, you get a bonus to your armor save, representing you're standing behind a tree, so that tree slows the bullet down a little bit before it gets to your armor. Assault phase has also had some major changes. The initiative stat is gone. Kerpoof. Goodbye. So sorry. We don't need you anymore. Because here's how the assault phase works. It's divided into the charge subphase and the fight subphase. And basically what happens is you charge. You declare your charges and you roll to see if you make it. If you make it, everything's good, and those units that charged go first. Does not matter anything else. The charging units always go first. Then, if you had any units that were already in close combat, your units, if it was your turn, go first. One of them. Then your opponent. Then you. Then your opponent. Alternating. This change put it that your turn gives you an advantage. Something that had not been part of previous editions of 40k for the assault phase. It was, for the most part, whoever's units had the higher initiative in those previous editions had the advantage, regardless of whose turn it was. So, turns now matter. And then, of course, once everything is said and done, you come into the morale phase. And what happens in the morale phase has changed. It's now, if you succeed on a morale check, you're good. Your unit's fine on the field. Everything's fine and dandy. If you fail the morale check, you lose 1 model per point you failed that morale check by. Which is why Space Marines no longer automatically succeed morale checks, because Space Marines could be caused to fall back in previous editions. It's they re-roll failed morale checks. And morale checks have a penalty to them based on the number of models you have already lost that turn. And it's, you roll 1 die, and you have to roll equal to or less than your leadership minus the number of casualties your unit took that turn. Of course, you can spend 2 command points to just automatically succeed. Even if it's impossible for you to succeed, you can spend those 2 command points to automatically pass. And with that, that's pretty much all I really have to say on 8th edition. Oh, sorry, I almost forgot one huge thing. Vehicles. Well, vehicles and monstrous creatures. Previous editions, we had an armor value on vehicles. Well, they decided in 8th edition to have it that having vehicles use their own separate rule set wasn't really conducive for quick play, because they were trying to make play go faster for this edition. So what they did for vehicles is vehicles now have a massive amount of wounds, and as a vehicle takes damage, it works down this tree. When it's at full health, it's got its full stats. When it's got taking a certain number of wounds, its stats worsen. Its speed, its weapon skill, its ballistic skill, the damage it deals from close combat attacks drops. And that goes all the way down until it's destroyed. Same applies with monstrous creatures. These are now representing that it's no longer a case of these are at full strength until they're dead. Now they're taking damage. Things aren't working as well. They might be able to get that last cannon to fire off another shot, but it's not going to be hitting as accurately, maybe because they're having to manhandle it instead of counting on the automated systems to aim it. Whatever. And that's made vehicles actually way more survivable. It now takes a lot of punishment to take out a vehicle, which is what it should have been, as opposed to previous editions where it was lucky rolls blowing the vehicle up on one shot. But with that, I now have really nothing more to say at this time on Warhammer 40k 8th edition. Next week, I'm going to be going to one of my obscure RPGs, Stalking the Night Fantastic, the Bureau 13 RPG. I look forward to seeing you then. So until then, just want you all to please remember to have fun and keep gaming.